Titles and body copy are easily the core component of most websites, most applications. Now, it is mixed in with other components and callouts and little interactive pieces, but overall, the principles that you derive from titles and body copy are going to be pretty fundamental to the way that you treat text throughout your interface designs. So let's take a look at the 5 main principles that I like to keep in mind when I'm dealing with titles and body copy. Okay, so first of all, we're gonna check out size. Size for both titles and for body copy. Now, the most common title sizes for websites are gonna be a little bit larger than your application. And that's kind of what this line indicates, that a lot of these titles would be more commonly found on desktop apps, mobile apps, and kind of more specifically mobile apps, because desktop tends to be quite a bit smaller. But for websites, you know, like large article-based, longer form with bigger headings like H1s or big callouts, you know, this could easily be like on the Apple.com website as AirPods Pro or things like that. So these are going to be a lot more suited for those big kind of like marketing headlines. And the only time you'll see bigger titles like this is in some of the apps, like you'll see the 34-point size on like the Apple Messages app, or kind of their bigger headings. And as you scroll, those end up becoming like a 17-point title in the header. So this is kind of a general rule of thumb for the title sizes. It's definitely not a law, but it's just a good starting place when you're just trying to kind of get those first pixels on the canvas. This is a good sizing reference to look at. All right, second, we're gonna look at weight. Now, on all of these titles, I have the weight set at extra bold. And you know, you're not always gonna use extra bold. I really like extra bold weights, so I'm kind of a fan of that. But you're gonna typically be in the bold category here. And every now and then you might have like a medium title, depending on the look and feel of your type and how everything kind of works together. But in general, bold is a really good place to start. And as you get heavier with your titles, you have the ability to go lighter. So if we did regular or even kind of like this extra light, you can definitely go extra light with a bold title or with a large title. But as you get smaller, these lighter type sizes are not going to work. So you can see if I'm using light, actually let's just change all of these to light so you can kind of see the difference here. Why don't we do extra light? Extra light, viewing this at 100%. Okay, so like this is a title set at 96-point font. That looks pretty nice. And even at 80-point, it looks still pretty nice. 60 is like borderline. It could still work, but 40, you know, you're pushing the boundary of whether or not light could work here. And definitely at 34-point down to 13, I would just strictly avoid lightweights altogether. So if you're going to be in the 60 or higher range, you can experiment with type sizes that are a bit lighter, but I would definitely kind of completely avoid that at these smaller sizes. And you're going to want to stay in the medium, semi-bold, bold range up in here. And sometimes regular, as we get into more components that have titles, we'll look at more variants within that category. But this is just a good rule of thumb to get started with your titles. All right, and now we're going to talk about line height for titles, and we'll circle back through all of this for body copy as well. All right, so line height is going to not really affect much when you're just looking at a single title. But as you get into longer titles, let's just make a longer title that spans 2 lines here. And I just have this, a line bottom on the text that allows it to kind of go up as I'm typing as a little trick there. But so basically you can see I've got my line height set at 100% here. And a good way to kind of check against your line height is going to be typing like a descender which is like the lowercase g, followed by like an ascender, which is like the uppercase A. So let's see, go longer title. And this is going to be a good reference. So like you can see between the capital A and the top of the L or the K, which are ascenders, there's plenty of space right in there. But as you get to the lowercase g and the A, it's getting a lot tighter. So you have to be careful if you have the lowercase descenders hanging out in your titles. This might not work. So we might want to bump it up to 110, 120. And this also depends on what casing that you're going to use with your titles. Are you going to use title case, or are you going to use sentence case where only the first letter is capitalized? So in this case, we might want to tighten it back up to 100. But definitely a big mistake that I see is whereas your body copy might be more closer to 150 or 175, you definitely don't want to go that high on your titles unless it's like a standalone element and you have like a really good reason to do it. But if you use 150 on your body copy and 150 on your text, it's going to look on your titles, it's going to look very, very strange. So for body copy for titles, I like to stay in the kind of 100 ballpark. I mean, you could bump it up to 120 for certain cases. But if you go with an all caps letter case, you have more flexibility because the letters are a little blockier. So now we could get into bumping this down to 90, even 80, basically as low as we could get it before they start clashing with each other. And sometimes you might want them to clash depending on if that's the style you're going with. But in this particular example, it looks a little bit too tight with those letter forms clashing. So I could get away with 75% capitalized here. Yeah, that looks pretty nice. All right, so width. Width and alignment are going to be the last two things we talk about here with our titles. So you can see right now my width here is the exact same as the body copy below, but you can see that this looks kind of weird, especially if this is my title. So I don't like having this long text here. You know, if this text was above the first, if it was more like that, then it might not be as weird. But overall, this size and this line spacing, like it's just a lot of kind of, let's see if I can get my pencil tool going here. There we go. So you see this negative space, it's just kind of creating a weird thing here. So I either need to adjust the size or the width of the title to make that kind of look better, or even change the copy. But you can see if I just make this a little bit larger, that's a lot nicer. And ideally, you know, maybe it's something like that. Or, you know, if I really like the way this double line looks, I could bring it back in here and then just reduce the size until it's only like that. So you can kind of play with how this is going to work. Play with the width a little bit. It's totally okay if you especially on a website, if your title is extending past the body of the text or even kind of coming in a little bit as a stylistic thing. So that's something that you could play with. The one thing you just would never want to do is have this, you know, a huge, even if you aligned all of this, like that just kind of looks weird. So kind of keep it reasonable in terms of if you're overhanging this or not, and if you're going to change it. And the last thing here, you can see me, I'm playing with the alignment. Most of the time you're going to want to align your text, especially if it's longer form copy, you're just going to want to left align it. It's going to be a little bit odd if you end up using center alignment on your titles. Let's go up a little bit larger so you can see more of a dramatic difference. And let's also change this back to title case there. There we go. And then we'll kind of bump up get back into the 100 range will work. All right, so this is centered on the artboard. And now I'm going to center this on the artboard. So you can see it's not the worst thing in the world, but it just looks odd to have a centered title and then a left aligned text down below it. Now, one way that we could make this work technically is if this was like a smaller block of copy and then we had maybe like 2 lines and it was more of a stylistic, left to right kind of magazine style. But even then, it just kind of feels odd to have this center aligned and then this left aligned. And actually, this is too much copy to be center aligned technically. I mean, you could get away with center aligning this amount of copy, but usually you would only want to center align, a smaller amount of body copy. Something like that could work, because then you have this nice, you kind of have this coming in, and you have the same kind of downward momentum created by both the title and the body. But if we bring that back to left align, you can see that if I go Command Option L here, and this is all left aligned, then that just has kind of a nicer, cleaner line, because it's always nice to get these like strong vertical lines, especially for websites. It just kind of helps you it just feels more balanced and that things can line up a little bit better. So getting those strong verticals. And a lot of times if you're doing something maybe a little bit more stylistic and say you're a little bit smaller title here, well, a lot of times you can get away with having some extra negative space over here in effort to be a little bit more stylistic. And a lot of times you can also balance the entire thing by having like a border on the bottom of the title. And then maybe you have like a date, or I don't know, whatever. Let's do like a date over here. So I'm making kind of like a right aligned and a left aligned on top of this, so it kind of has like a nicer balance to it. So now I've got like a stronger vertical edge here, and I didn't quite line that up. 14, there we go. You would always want to line up your baseline here. Don't necessarily rely on trying to line it up like that. You would always want your titles to be aligned to the baseline, and that goes for most copy, including titles especially. Your baseline is going to be the best. So you can see there's different ways to play around with these titles. And again, it depends on the context for which you're designing for. This is not always going to make sense for an app, but it might make sense for a news article or a marketing blob to kind of have just some fun variation with your titles. The one case where it would make sense to have a centered title with maybe left aligned text is going to be in the context of a fixed title bar that you would see in an application like this. So you'd have, your iPhone title bar up here, something like that. And then, as you scroll, this stuff's going to go down below it. That's not going to be as bothersome as having like, a huge centered title like this on a website. It's a slightly different use case. So I think in the mobile form, in the mobile format, that's going to make a lot more sense than doing something like this on the web. All right, so let's get into these 5 things for body copy. Starting off with size. In general, body copy is going to be set at 16 pixels as kind of like a baseline minimum. And this is definitely for the web. The web's default paragraph tag is going to render at 16 pixels. So you can see I've got 16 pixels here. And depending on the typeface, you might want to go up to 18 pixels. It's kind of your call. 16, you could get away with 13 if it was going to be like a secondary kind of smaller like text specs or a smaller kind of area that didn't have a lot of copy, usually the kind of rule of thumb is the lower the amount of copy, the greater flexibility you have with experimenting with size, width, line height, all of those components. The smaller amount of text, you have greater flexibility to play around with those kind of variables. But the greater the amount of text, the more you want to stick to kind of the tried and true sizes, because it's just all about readability. So if we go back to 16 here, that's going to be set up against a 24-point title here. All right, so that's kind of a general sizing rule for body copy. Now let's talk about the weight here. So you can see on this one, I'm using just a regular weight. Like I said, if you have smaller amount of text, for example, if I get rid of all that, you can get away with going bold or semi-bold, and it's more about like a call out, which we'll cover more about call outs. But unless you have a very specific reason to make your body copy bold, you're typically going to want to avoid it unless it's being treated as more of a stylistic element. So we're talking strictly body copy here. So we're going to keep it at regular, and the weight is going to largely depend on how you use it with the title as well. So you can see on this title, I've got this bold, whereas this is regular, and these are going to be like two or three steps apart from each other. So I've got regular, medium. So this is one step down, 2, 3. So if I wanted like a true bold to stand out from the rest, you're typically gonna want to be at least 2 to 3 steps darker to have an actual bold. So you can see if I go, let's see, 1, 2, 3. So if I went semi-bold with my body copy and I needed a good bold, then I could go black, and it would be enough contrast between here and here that it would actually look like a bold. And again, the bolder body copy is going to be more for stylistic renditions, depending on the direction of the thing that you're designing for. And as always, if you're going to have more of a traditional actual body copy that's intended for people to actually read, then you're going to want to stick to some of the recommended sizes for all of that. All right, so next up for body copy, line height and width. We'll tackle both of these at the same time. Line height for body copy. Your standard kind of go-to line height is going to be like 150% for your body copy set at 16 pixels. And depending on the typeface, you can go a little bit tighter, like 135. You can even go 125. It just depends on the amount of text and the kind of feel that you want it to give. You can go as low as 120 for body copy, or you could even go as high as 220. That ends up looking like a college essay that you wrote on, skipping a line for just so you could fill up more room. But it's not necessarily a bad look. It's just depending on, that sweet spot for the legibility, the readability for the particular thing that you're designing for. So a good baseline is going to be like 150, 150% or 1.5. And then depending on the typeface, so this is a sans serif typeface set at 150, but you can see on this example, I've got this set at 160, and it actually doesn't look too much larger than this one. So if we zoom out and look at these two blocks of text together, make this a little bit larger. So this is set at 16 point with 150 as the line height. And because I changed this to Georgia and bumped it up to 18 point and bumped it down to 160, just because this particular typeface felt too tight. So if I went back to 16 and 150 here, whoops, 150%. Well, is it going to go? There we go. So both this font Enter and this font Georgia are set at 16 points, and they're both set at a line height of 150%. But look how much tighter. Let me just get, this is the exact same block of text. And this one, the letter forms are wider, and they're also a little bit taller, which is going to extend that body copy down. And even in the same, actually, this is set at 471. Let's set this at 520. And all right, now they're both the same width, so it's a little bit more of a realistic difference. But again, you can still see that it's breaking down almost 2 full lines below the other one. So it just really depends on the typeface that you're using as to the size and the line height that you really want to use. So for this particular sans serif, it's kind of small, and I think it just reads a little bit better when there's a little bit more breathing room in here. And it, again, this is kind of designed in abstract, so it depends on, are you going to have a huge thing to read, or is it kind of a tight, quick moment of information that would allow for a tighter line spacing? That's something that you'll have to decide when you get into that specific context. Okay, so last, let's look at width and alignment together. This is going to be huge. So in general, there is a timeless graphic design principle that says body copy should not be less than 45 characters wide, and it should not be more than 75 characters wide, which means somewhere between 45 and 75 characters is going to be your optimal body width. So I have made this a little bit easier for us, and I've made the 44th character red and the 76th character somewhere between here is our sweet spot for the line break. And the reason for that is if you're extended past 75, it's going to be quite cumbersome to read this entire thing and then come back over here and read it all the way over here and then come back. And that's why there's a cap on 75. And it's definitely, a principle and a recommendation. It's not, no one's going to come and arrest you if you go over 75 and you go to 80. That's not going to be that big of a deal. It's just when you start going too much further past that, it looks very unprofessional to go much past that. I've got an example here where I want to show you this body copy where it's a little bit too long. I was browsing through the web and I found this website, and I thought to myself, I bet you this is longer than 75. And also the line height on this call out is it's kind of a little bit too large in my opinion. So if we get into our inspector here, I'm going to grab this paragraph, and actually let's just double check, see how wide this is. We'll grab the second line. I'm going to open up IA Writer. You can use any like Sublime Text, anything that will give you the word count. Look down here at the bottom. So this is 102 characters. So let's select, let's copy from our team just so we can get a better gauge on what the 45 to 72 mark would be. All right, so if we break it in the middle of developers, that would be 75 characters. So what I'm going to do is put a little max width on here, and then just make it go up. So we want to break it right here inside of developers, because that would be the 75 mark. Okay, so we're going to leave it right in there. And since there's not a ton of text, there's only 3 paragraphs, they have this set at 170, which could work, but I'm just going to tighten it up a tiny bit to 150 here. And then now, if we look at this is technically a paragraph. So we could make it a bit longer. Right now it's breaking at A, which is going to be 41 characters, which is below the minimum. So if we put it at after of at least, that would give us at least 50. And we could still even break it after passionate because that would be 62. All right, so let's add a max width to this call out. Max width. So what do we say? A group of passionate. So we could go all the way out to well, I guess it's not going to break. Group of, that's fine. But also they have the same body copy line height was set on this call out. And you can tell this is more of a title, and that's just a little too large. It has too much breathing room in there. So we set the paragraph to 150. And if we set that to 150, that's better. But I think we could tighten it up to like 130, maybe even like 135. And even though this is set at I think that's close to 75 characters, it's still, this particular context, it just feels a little bit long to me even after we've made those changes. So that's going to be 83 characters. Yeah. So I think having that inspector open changed the width of that paragraph a bit. So let's tighten up the max width a little bit more. Okay, it's starting to feel better. And you can see that there's also these different sizes. We talked about font size in another lesson, but I don't think that this extra size is doing any extra favors. So forget what message we're trying to say here. I just want to take this out for now and see how that works. And I like this hanging over, but I think it could be accentuated a little bit more if we tighten up those smaller paragraphs even a little bit more. So let's take those to 60 rem. The rem is based on 16 pixels usually. So if you did 16 times 60 rem, it would be 960, but that just depends on what your rem is set at. Okay, now this is looking better, but now I'm looking at the negative space here versus the negative space in here. It doesn't have to be the same, but it's worth looking at. See if we can add a little more bottom margin here. Let's see. All right, that's a little bit better. All right. To me, this is looking a lot better. So I'm gonna command return and load this page again into another tab. Scroll down. All right, so you can see a big difference here. There's not a lot of negative space, and there's not a lot of, all of this is set to 170 line height, which makes this little call out title be a lot higher than the 170 on this, because it's 170% of the actual font size, not 170% of the base size. There are ways to do that with code and whatnot, but we're just talking about just the overall look and feel. So if you cycle back and forth between these two, this is just a much cleaner, more easily read web page than this is. Right now, this is kind of a blob of text. It doesn't look horrible, but it just looks like it could be tightened up. And that's really what you're doing with type design, with your body and your copy. You have to make those small tweaks to get it really tight. And whether it's a title or a body copy or call out any text that you're using, you're going to have to make these incremental changes like your line height, your weight, and you're gonna have to play every element off of each other to make it really nice and professional. You're gonna have to get into all these little details: size, weight, line height, width, and alignment. Those are gonna be the 5 most important things that you can look at when you're trying to lay out your type size. So if you can take the title and take the body copy as like a good strong foundation for those 5 different components for how you're designing it, and extend that into the rest of your design, that's going to give you a huge just kind of a clean foundation to use for your typographic usage throughout your entire project. So for homework, I want you to lay out 3 different layouts I want you to lay out 3 different artboards in your design program. Just let's go with like a larger size so we can kind of experiment here. I want you to do a title, a body copy, a secondary title, and a little bit more body copy. And I want you to experiment with 3 different versions. So one version is going to have, you know, a certain type size for the title, certain type for the body. And then your second one, you know, if you use a small one in the first one, go really big on the second one and play with 15-point body copy and up to maybe 18 or 21-point body copy. And then on the third one, do something completely different. Maybe the body copy is 24 points and your titles are 16 points. But just come up with 3 different designs like I have here, with just a simple 1-line title. Maybe another one has like a 2 or 3-line title. The body copy is up to you. Just pick something better than Lorem Ipsum. I'm using this dummy text that I found online. You can just copy and paste this down below, or you can grab your own stuff. It doesn't matter. So just come up with 3, post it in Slack. Let's get some feedback. Let's get some discussion going and take it from there.